Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 7 o'clock main news. In tonight's headlines, the UN Security Council condemns in the strongest terms the Sinai terrorist attacks which killed and injured dozens of Egyptian soldiers and civilians. The so-called IS insurgents seize a crude oil station near the northern Iraqi city of Kirkuk. Fighting rages in eastern Ukraine as pro-Russian separatists seek to tighten the circle around government forces. And Italy's parliament elects Constitutional Court Judge Sergio Mattarella as the country's president. UN Security Council condemned in the strongest terms the Sinai terrorist attacks which killed and injured dozens of Egyptian soldiers and civilians. In a statement released yesterday, members of the Security Council extended their condolences to the families of the victims and their sympathy to all those injured in these heinous attacks, as well as to the people and government of Egypt. More details in the following report by Hiba Abdurrahman.
UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon condemned today the recent militant attacks on Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. The 15-member body of the United Nations Security Council reiterated their determination to combat all forms of terrorism in accordance with its responsibilities under the Charter of the UN. In the statement, the UNSC underlined the need to bring preparators, organizers, financiers and sponsors of this terrorist attack to justice and urged all states, in accordance with their obligations under international law and relevant Security Council resolutions, to cooperate actively with the Egyptian government in this regard. They also reminded states that they must ensure that measures taken to combat terrorism comply with all their obligations under international law, in particular international human rights, refugee and humanitarian law. Also, the Arab League, GCC Council, the United States and Singapore, along with other countries and organizations, have condemned the militant attacks on Egypt's Sinai Peninsula that left at least 30 people dead and many others wounded. Militants carried out a wave of attacks on military facilities and personnel in the northeastern Sinai Peninsula, leaving at least 30 people dead. Responsibility for the attacks was claimed by the Wilayat Sinai militant group, formerly known as Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis. Following these terrorist attacks, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has cut short a visit to an African Union summit to deal with such attacks. State media said that the Sisi headed today an urgent meeting for the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces to discuss the current situation in Sinai Peninsula. Active in Sinai Peninsula, the organization acquired its current name after reportedly swearing allegiance to the so-called IS. Egyptian security forces have been waging a campaign against militants in Sinai, which shares borders with both Israel and Gaza Strip, amid a rise in attacks on army and police personnel since the ousting of Mohammed Morsi in 2013. On 24th of October, at least 31 soldiers were also killed in an attack on a military site in North Sinai, prompting Egyptian authorities to declare a state of emergency and curfew in some areas of the restive province.
So-called IS group today seized a small crude oil station near the northern Iraqi city of Kirkuk, where 15 employees were working, and explosions in and around the capital Baghdad killed at least 9 people. 2 officials from the state-run oil company confirmed the militants seized a crude oil separation unit in Khabaz and said 15 oil workers were missing after the company lost contact with them. The so-called IS group seized at least 4 small oil fields when it overran large areas of northern Iraq last summer and began selling crude oil and gasoline to finance their operations. Meanwhile, Kurdish military forces continue to push back militants in further fighting near Khabaz today. After a long battle to expel the so-called IS group, the Syrian border town of Kobani bears the scars of heavy shelling and clashes between the militants and Kurdish forces. As inhabitants of Kobani surveyed the damage, some looked to the international community to help them rebuild the town. The main Kurdish militia, the People's Protection Unit, or the YPG, now aims to liberate all villages near the Kobani area from the IS group fighters. Kurdish forces announced they had pushed IS militants out of Kobani on Monday after a bloody 4-month campaign. Other reports quoted 2 IS fighters as saying that constant pummeling airstrikes by coalition have drove them out of Kobani. Efforts to resolve the political crisis in Yemen appear to be collapsing after the Southern Separatist Party suspended its participation in talks to form a new government. Only former President Ali Abdullah Saleh's General People's Congress Party joined the three-day talks aimed at filling the power vacuum left after Yemeni President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi and his cabinet resigned on January 22nd. Adding to Yemen's turmoil, soldiers are threatening to block a major highway leading to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a crucial shipping lane in the Red Sea. Meanwhile, hundreds of protesters rallied in the southern city of Aden to reject the solution offer of Houthis that includes forming a transitional presidential council formed of 6 members. The growing influence of the Houthi movement has triggered protests in several cities, deepening the crisis. Efforts by Japan and Jordan to secure the release of 2 of their nationals held captive by the so-called IS militants remain unpredictable. Militants had threatened to kill Jordanian pilot Mu'ad al-Kasasba unless a would-be suicide bomber being held on death row in Amman was handed over by sunset on Thursday. Japanese journalist Kenji Goto was also being held by the militants. Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga arrived at the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's office today, and the Prime Minister is on standby to receive regular updates on the situation. The hostage crisis comes as IS militants coming under increased military pressure from US-led airstrikes and by Kurdish and Iraqi troops. Yasuhide Nakayama, the head of Tokyo's emergency response team in the Jordanian capital Amman, told journalists that there was no progress in the attempt to negotiate the release of Japanese journalist Kenji Goto and First Lieutenant in the Jordanian Air Force Mu'az al-Kasasba. Funerals have taken place in southern Pakistan for the victims of a suicide attack on a mosque during Friday prayers, which police say killed at least 60 people. Dozens were also wounded in the attack in Sindh province's Shikarpur district, making it one of the worst sectarian attacks in Pakistan in recent years. Militants linked to the Taliban said they carried out the attack when the bomber detonated explosives strapped to his body in the center of the mosque. An official day of mourning has been declared across Sindh. Some protests took place today as some groups burned tires and blocked roads during rallies in Shikarpur town where the attack took place. 2 people were killed when violence broke out at a protest in the Afghan capital today. Around 500 protesters streamed into an eastern part of the city to protest against France's Charlie Hebdo magazine, putting residents of nearby international compounds on a state of alert. Police sources said the protest turned violent when protesters attacked policemen with burning tires, stones and then gunfire. Protests against the French newspaper Charlie Hebdo's cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, have erupted around the world and taken place weekly in the Afghan capital. UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon today welcomed an African Union proposal to set up a regional 5-nation force of 7,500 troops to fight Nigeria's Boko Haram militants. During an African Union summit being held in the Ethiopian capital, the proposed force was backed by the AU's Peace and Security Council on Friday, and the Pan-African body is now seeking UN Security Council approval plus a trust fund to pay for it. Later, officials at the AU summit said military experts will discuss the force on February 5th to the 7th in Cameroon's capital Yaoundé. At least 30,000 people have been killed and more than 1 million made forced from their homes by Boko Haram violence since 2009. A new round of peace talks were about to start in the Ukrainian crisis today, even as fighting between Kiev and government forces and pro-Russian separatists raged in the east, claiming civilians and military lives. The talks under the auspices of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or the OSCE, whose official also arrived in Minsk, will be the first since September when a ceasefire was agreed. Our reporter Dina Nasser has more on this story.
The truce between rebels and the Ukrainian government that was regularly violated from the start collapsed completely as the rebels launched a new advance last week. Heavy shelling continued in Ukraine's eastern regions as the separatists sought to tighten a circle around government forces clinging on to control of the strategic rail and road junction of Debaltsev. Regional Police Chief Vyacheslav Abroskin said 12 civilians were killed today by separatist artillery shelling of the town, which lies to the northeast of the big city of Donetsk. Defense Minister Stepan Poltorak said 15 Ukrainian soldiers were killed and 30 wounded in clashes across the east. Yesterday, residents of war-torn Donetsk continued to queue for food supplies as 5 people were killed at an aid centre amid continuing violence in the area. Overall, at least 12 people were killed by artillery fire in the rebel stronghold yesterday, while hopes for a break in hostilities were dashed when an attempt to call a new round of peace talks in Minsk failed. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry will travel to Ukraine next week to show U.S. support for the government as Ukrainian troops fight pro-Russian separatists in the east of the country. State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki said in Washington, D.C. that Kerry will be in Kiev for talks with senior Ukrainian officials and lawmakers on February the 5th. He will then head to an international security conference in Munich, Germany. There had been speculation Kerry might travel to Moscow during the trip, becoming the most senior U.S. official to visit Russia since the start of the Ukraine crisis last year. Psaki said no such stop is planned, although she said Kerry will meet Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov while both men are at the Munich Security Conference. The Obama administration has placed blame for the vast majority of the ceasefire violations on Russia and the separatists, but condemned the Donetsk shelling without identifying which part was responsible.
Italian lawmakers elected Sergio Mattarella, a constitutional court judge and veteran centre-left politician, as president today, handing a welcome political victory to Prime Minister Matteo Renzi. After 3 inconclusive rounds of voting this week, in which a 2/3 majority was needed, Renzi's candidate Mattarella was elected in the 4th round. Though the court has not been finalised, Mattarella drew broad parliamentary support, garnering more than 650 votes. Mattarella is expected to be sworn in next week for a 7-year term, taking over officially for Giorgio Napolitano, who resigned earlier this month. The Australian Embassy recently celebrated Australia Day at the Regency Hotel. Australia Day is celebrated annually on the 26th of January and marks 226 years since the establishment of the first settlement at Port Jackson on the east coast of Australia in 1788. The celebration witnessed a number of distinguished guests, diplomats and media personnel attend the reception to congratulate the Australian community on the special occasion. Our reporter Rinwa Japuri has more.
Australia Day is celebrated annually on 26 January and marks the anniversary of the 1788 arrival of the first fleet of British ships at Sydney Cove, New South Wales, and raising of the flag of Great Britain at the site by Governor Arthur Phillip. Though 26 January marks the specific event, Australia Day celebrations reflect contemporary Australia, the diverse society and landscape, the remarkable achievements and the bright future.
The connection between the United Kingdom and Australia goes back many, many years. We share the same Queen, we share more links than I can talk about. And I think it's a great privilege for me to be here as a British ambassador, to stand alongside my Australian colleague and to help the Australians, our close friends and cousins, celebrate Australia Day and to celebrate the partnership that we enjoy. So it's a very happy occasion and I'm delighted to be here.
Australia has always and continues to be a firm supporter of Kuwait's independence and security. Moreover, Australia and Kuwait enjoy a close relationship on several fronts, including bilateral, economical and the cultural front.
I'm as well very happy to be here. It's a pleasure to congratulate Australia on their National Day. And everyone here is having lots of fun, and we want to thank the ambassador and their team for this wonderful event.
What I should say first is that although I've been ambassador here for the past 3 years, I used to be a non-resident ambassador here before, from 2001 until 2005, end of 2004. So I've been coming to Kuwait regularly for a long time, and it's therefore very difficult for me to come to the end of my assignment and to be going back to Australia. I would like to stay in Kuwait for a very long time, but there comes a time when I think Canberra thinks it's about time I came home.
Apart from the growing business opportunities that Australians enjoy, Australia and Kuwait share a deep commitment to global peace and stability.
Australia Day is a very special day to Australians wherever they may be. Tonight, the Australian Embassy Kuwait celebrated Australia Day in a remarkable reception From the Regency Hotel, I'm Gemma Jaburi reporting to you for the English News.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel rejected any idea of offering more debt relief to Greece. Her comments come amid growing tensions between the new Greek government and its international creditors. The new Greek government, led by the left-wing Syriza party, said it wants to negotiate to share the country's debt. The government also pledged to roll back austerity measures imposed by the European Union and the International Monetary Fund in exchange for a €240 billion debt bailout granted to avoid a financial meltdown. Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras will be visiting Italy and France on Tuesday and Wednesday to present his proposals for solving Greece's debt problem. Loyac Kuwait celebrated receiving an EU Special Mention Award for promoting human rights, which was presented by the head of the delegation of the European Union based in Riyadh, His Excellency Ambassador Adam Kulash. Loyac was founded by a group of committed women in Kuwait who recognize that youth can be led towards peace by providing them with opportunities for personal growth while experiencing the joy of services and developing their professional skills through on-job training internships that build self-confidence. Here's more on the event in this report by Salim El-Kindari.
Attended by Minister of Information and Minister of State for Youth Affairs, His Excellency Sheikh Salman Sabah Salim Al-Sabah, Loyac Kuwait celebrated getting the EU Shariat Special Mention Award for promoting human rights.
Tonight we're going to celebrate Loyac receiving a special mention of the Shariat Award for promoting human rights. And this is going to be given to Loyac by His Excellency, the Ambassador of the European Union, who's in Riyadh and flew today to come and award Loyac this special mention. The importance of this special mention is that Loyac is going to be recognized worldwide as an organization that promotes human rights in the Arab world, especially in the GCC countries.
Loyac is a non-profit NGO focused on the empowerment of the youth through two branches, by offering professional and personal development programs and training, like the internship with a summer program, where basically we take students that are still in college or high school and we expose them to the professional world so that they could get skills they require in order to it'll be easier for them to get a job when they graduate. And then we have another branch that we focus on, which is community outreach. We give students opportunities to volunteer here and abroad in order for them to get exposed to the world and kind of get a holistic experience and develop themselves inside out, if you will. It's like to allow them to kind of reach their full potential after they finish our programs.
While running several programs for the youth to develop their professional skills, Loyac is embracing peace as its prime awareness message.
For a chance to see our reports again, please visit our YouTube channel at MOI Kuwait News. And to recap tonight's news, here are the headlines once again. The UN Security Council condemns in the strongest terms the Sinai terrorist attacks which killed and injured dozens of Egyptian soldiers and civilians. The so-called IS insurgents seize a crude oil station near the northern Iraqi city of Kirkuk. Fighting rages in eastern Ukraine as pro-Russian separatists seek to tighten the circle around government forces. And Italy's parliament elects Constitutional Court Judge Sergio Mattarella as the country's president. Thank you for joining us.